Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be back.
So today we're venturing into some pretty thought-provoking territory. We're exploring this idea that suffering, well, that it might actually hold some positive potential, especially, from a spiritual angle.
Right. Which immediately sounds kind of strange, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because most of us, our instinct is just avoid pain, avoid discomfort.
Absolutely. Avoid it at all costs. But that's why this conversation we caught recently was so interesting.
Oh, the one on the Grandmaster Wolf YouTube channel?
Yeah, exactly. Their video is Suffering: A Path to Awakening with GM Wolf and Matt Rickard. It was like a really casual chat between them.
Yeah, very relaxed, but they got into some deep stuff. It definitely got us thinking.
It really did. So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is to kind of unpack the perspectives they shared.
Okay.
Could suffering genuinely be a pathway to some kind of awakening? And, maybe more importantly, what could that actually mean for you listening right now?
Right. How does this translate?
Okay, so let's dive in. One of the first things they brought up, and it really grabbed me, was this analogy about bungee jumping. Can you maybe walk us through that?
Sure. So they basically compared suffering to being pushed off a cliff for a bungee jump.
Okay, yeah. Intense image.
Very intense. Think about that initial feeling, just absolute terror as you start falling, right?
Oh, yeah. Stomach drops, everything.
But then the cord catches. You get that wild bounce back. And surprisingly, for some people, that turns into this feeling of, like, intense joy.
Even wanting to do it again, they said.
Exactly. Which seems crazy after the initial fear.
So the connection they were making was sometimes these really strong external pressures, this sort of terrifying push like suffering, it can actually force us into positive internal changes.
Changes we probably wouldn't choose to make ourselves.
Right. It's like we need that shock to the system sometimes, that jolt to break us out of our usual patterns and, I guess, push us towards something new.
Yeah, it disrupts the status quo in a big way.
So what's the core idea there for you? It feels like maybe discomfort is sometimes the catalyst we need for growth, even if we wouldn't sign up for it willingly.
That's precisely it, I think. Those experiences that feel overwhelmingly negative at the time can actually end up propelling us forward in ways we just didn't expect.
Okay, so building on that, the idea of unexpected outcomes from really intense situations. They then went to an even more extreme example.
The death row scenario.
Yeah, it's a heavy one. But what was the point they were trying to illustrate with that?
Well, it's really intense, like you said. But the idea presented was that in those ultimate situations, extreme fear, total isolation, some individuals report experiencing these profound spiritual awakenings.
Even out-of-body experiences, they mention.
Right. And the reasoning, or the speculation, was that the brain, when it's facing just unimaginable terror and confinement, it might desperately seek some kind of escape.
Like a psychological defense mechanism kicking into overdrive?
Sort of. Leading to maybe a detachment from the physical reality, from the body, and perhaps giving a glimpse of what they termed pure consciousness.
It's pretty mind-bending. It really shows the brain's incredible ability to adapt or maybe try to cope, even when things are absolutely horrific.
It does. But they were super clear about this, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't being presented as, like, a recommended path to enlightenment or anything.
No, definitely not a life hack. It's more about understanding the extreme potential, the strange capabilities of the human mind under extreme duress.
Exactly. A potential outcome, not a goal.
So, okay, we've seen these extreme examples, bungee jumping, death row, showing how suffering might impact consciousness in radical ways. But how does this connect to more everyday kinds of suffering? They brought in the story of Siddhartha, the Buddha. What was the key takeaway there?
Right. So the story, as they told it, focused on Siddhartha's first real encounters with the suffering in the world, seeing sickness, old age, death, poverty.
Things he'd been shielded from.
Exactly. And his first reaction, which is very human, was basically, I want to end all this suffering. He wanted to fix it, eliminate it from the world.
Understandable. But he came to a different realization, didn't he?
He did. He realized that this kind of external suffering, it's kind of inherent in the nature of, well, matter, the physical world. It couldn't just be completely wiped out.
Okay, so he hits this point where he sees he can't just wave a magic wand and make all the bad stuff disappear.
Right. And that realization was crucial because it shifted his focus.
How so?
Instead of trying to eliminate the external suffering, which he saw as maybe impossible, he turned inward. He started exploring how we can transcend our response to suffering.
Ah, okay. So it's not about changing the world necessarily, but changing how we relate to it.
That's the angle they took. And this is where the conversation started getting, I think, a bit more practical for most of us.
Yeah, leading into that central concept they discuss, non-reaction. Can you unpack that idea a bit?
Sure. The core idea is pretty simple on the surface, but deep. It's that we don't actually have to react emotionally or mentally to suffering, whether it's physical pain or emotional upset.
Okay. How did they illustrate that?
They used a really good analogy, I thought, about being offended. Think about it. Can someone actually make you feel offended? Or is the feeling of offense something that arises within you as your reaction to what they said or did?
Right. Someone says words, but the feeling of offense is my internal response.
Exactly. Their point was that offense is self-generated, essentially.
Yeah.
It's your interpretation and reaction.
Okay, I see the parallel. So how did they apply that same logic to physical pain?
Similarly, they suggested that pain itself is, at its root, a physical sensation. It's a signal from your body.
Like, hey, something's wrong here.
Right. But the suffering that often comes with pain, that arises more from our mental and emotional reaction to the sensation.
You mean like the fear of the pain, the resistance to it, the story we build around it, like, oh, this is terrible, I can't stand it.
Precisely. The struggle against the sensation. So, this raises a really interesting question for you, the listener. Could you actually have more influence over your experience of suffering than you currently think?
That's a powerful question. And they didn't just leave it there, did they? They talked about a technique to help cultivate this non-reaction.
Yeah, meditation. That was presented as the practice ground for this.
How did they describe using meditation for this purpose?
They described it as a way to practice observing. Observing your thoughts as they come and go. Observing your feelings. Observing physical sensations. But without getting tangled up in them. Without engaging.
Just watching.
Just watching. They use that great image of finding the eye of the storm.
Ah, okay. Like there can be all this chaos swirling around your mind, worries, plans, discomfort, but you find this calm, still center within it all.
Exactly. A place of pure awareness that isn't touched by the turmoil. The goal isn't to stop the thoughts or feelings, but to become aware of them without being swept away.
So you can deal with external stuff from a calmer place.
Right. With more clarity, less reactivity.
It sounds simple, but I imagine it's incredibly difficult in practice. Just telling yourself don't react doesn't usually work.
Oh, for sure. They definitely acknowledge that. They stressed it takes consistent practice.
Did they give any time frame?
They mentioned something like it might take a month of really dedicated, consistent practice just to start getting a feel for that inner stillness, that observer perspective.
So it's not a quick fix. It requires real effort and dedication.
Absolutely. You have to commit to just sitting and observing again and again without judging yourself when you inevitably get carried away by thoughts.
And to make this really concrete, less abstract, they shared a pretty intense personal story. The one about the teacher and the sword wound.
Yeah, that was a powerful one. Really illustrated the difference between raw sensation and our reaction as suffering.
Can you recount that? It was quite something.
Yeah, so one of the speakers in the video described being seriously cut with a sword during training. Yeah, major ouch. And when his teacher came over to ask him about it, his immediate instinctive response was, it's incredibly painful.
Which sounds like a perfectly normal response.
Totally. But the teacher's reaction was unconventional. Apparently a slap.
Whoa, okay, why?
Followed by the instruction to basically get out of his head, stop labeling it, and just describe the raw physical sensations he was actually experiencing right now.
Wow. Okay, so shifting the focus from the label pain to the actual physical data.
Exactly. So under the teacher's, let's say, forceful guidance, he started focusing on the specifics. The sharp feeling of the cut itself, the throbbing sensation, maybe the heat.
Just the objective facts of the feeling.
Right. And then the teacher asked him something like, okay, are you still feeling pain? And the speaker described having this sudden, profound realization.
Well,
He realized he was still aware of all those raw sensations. The sharpness, the throbbing, but the struggle, the intense suffering he'd felt just moments before had actually come from his mental resistance to those feelings. His fight against them.
So when he stopped fighting it, stopped labeling it unbearable pain, and just observed the sensations for what they were.
The suffering component significantly lessened or shifted.
Right.
It wasn't that the sensations vanished, but his relationship to them changed profoundly in that moment. It was presented as a really key, lasting insight for him.
That's a huge distinction, isn't it? The idea that the resistance to the feeling can create more suffering than the feeling itself.
It really is.
But okay, that's a dramatic story from a martial arts context. How do you apply this when you're dealing with, say, a headache or maybe emotional distress in everyday life? It feels harder then.
For sure. And they acknowledged that challenge. Their advice was pretty direct, actually.
What was it?
Essentially. Just got to do, you had to throw yourself into the practice. Meaning intentionally practicing observing your inner world, thoughts, emotions, physical feelings, without immediate judgment, without immediately reacting or trying to push them away.
So consciously choosing to watch instead of react.
Yeah. Almost like taking a leap of faith into observing what's happening inside, relaxing into the awareness of it, without getting swept up in the stories about it.
So it's about creating that little bit of breathing room, that space between the stimulus, the feeling, the thought, and your response to it.
That's a good way to put it. Becoming the watcher, the observer, rather than just being completely identified with the experience.
Like that eye of the storm idea again.
Exactly. That really seems to be the core practice they were pointing towards. You can have all this internal turbulence happening, but if you can learn to rest in that center of awareness, you remain untouched by it in a fundamental way.
And the idea is if you cultivate that inner stillness, that non-reactive presence,
then you can approach whatever life throws at you. The external challenges, the difficult conversations, the physical discomforts, with more calm, more clarity, and maybe less overall distress.
Okay. So let's try and bring this all together then. What are the main takeaways for you from this deep dive into that Grandmaster Wolf conversation?
Well, we definitely explored the more extreme idea that suffering can potentially be a catalyst for a major shift in consciousness, like in those rare, intense situations.
Right, the bungee jump or death row examples, though, again, not a recommended path.
Definitely not. But perhaps more practically, the key insight seems to be about changing our relationship with suffering.
Through developing this non-reaction, this mindful awareness.
Exactly. Shifting from automatically fighting against unpleasant experiences to consciously observing them.
And underpinning all of that was this fundamental idea that kept coming up.
That you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, you are not your physical sensations.
You are the awareness itself, the observer behind it all.
Precisely. You are the space in which all those experiences happen.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to take away and ponder. Think about a challenge or maybe just a discomfort you're currently facing in your life. Could be physical, could be emotional. What might happen if you shifted your focus, just experimentally, from resisting the pain of it, whatever that pain is, to simply observing the actual sensations, the actual thoughts and feelings involved, without the label, without the struggle?
How might that change your experience of it? What would it actually mean for you to find your own eye of the storm within that situation?
Yeah, definitely something interesting to explore.
It really is. Well, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for exploring this with us.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.